on the shortness of life. Most human beings, Paulinus, complain about the meanness of nature because we are born for a brief span of life, and because this spell of time that has been given to us rushes by so swiftly and rapidly that with very few exceptions, life ceases for the rest of us just when we are getting ready for it. Nor is it just the man in the street and the unthinking mass of people who groan over this as they see it universal evil. The same feeling lies behind complaints from even distinguished men. Hence the dictum of the greatest of doctors: life is short, art is long. Hence, too, the grievance, most improper to a wise man, which Aristotle expressed when he was taking nature to task for indulging animals with such long existences that they can live through 5 or 10 human lifetimes, while a far shorter limit is set for men who are born to a great and extensive destiny. It's not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. Life is long enough, and a sufficiently generous amount has been given to us for the highest achievements if it were all well invested. But when it is wasted in heedless luxury and spent on no good activity, we are forced at last, by death's final constraint, to realize that it has passed away before we knew it was passing. So it is. We are not given a short life, but we make it short. And we are not ill-supplied, but wasteful of it. Just as when ample and princely wealth falls to a bad owner, it is squandered in a moment. But wealth, however modest, if entrusted to a good custodian, increases with use. So our lifetime extends amply if you manage it properly. Why do we complain about nature? She has acted kindly. Life is long if you know how to use it. But one man is gripped by insatiable greed, another by a laborious dedication to useless tasks. One man is soaked in wine, another sluggish with idleness. One man is worn out by political ambition, which is always at the mercy of the judgment of others. Another, through hope of profit, is driven headlong over all lands and seas by the greed of trading. Some are tormented by a passion for army life, always intent on inflicting dangers on others, or anxious about danger to themselves. Some are worn out by the self-imposed servitude of thankless attendance on the great. Many are occupied by either pursuing other people's money or complaining about their own. Many pursue no fixed goal, but are tossed about in ever-changing designs by a fickleness which is shifting, inconstant, and never satisfied with itself. Some have no aims at all for their life's course, but death takes them unawares as they yawn languidly, so much so that I cannot doubt the truth of that oracular remark of the greatest of poets. It is a small part of life we rarely live. Indeed, all the rest is not life, but merely time. Vices surround and assail men from every side, and do not allow them to rise again and lift their eyes to discern the truth, but keep them overwhelmed and rooted in their desires. Never can they recover their true selves. If by chance they achieve some tranquility, just as a swell remains on the deep sea even after the wind has dropped, so they go on tossing about and never find rest from their desires. Do you think I'm speaking only of those whose wickedness is acknowledged? Look at those whose good fortune people gather to see. They are choked by their own blessings. How many find their riches a burden? How many burst a blood vessel by their eloquence and their daily striving to show off their talents? How many are pale from constant pleasures? How many are left no freedom by the crowd of clients surrounding them? In a word, run through them all, from lowest to highest. One calls for legal assistance, another comes to help. One is on trial, another defends him, another gives a judgment. No one makes his claim to himself, but each is exploited for another's sake. Ask about those whose names are learned by heart, and you will see that they have these distinguishing marks. X cultivates Y, and Y cultivates Z. No one bothers about himself. Again, certain people reveal the most stupid indignation. They complain about the pride of their superiors because they did not have time to give them an audience when they wanted one. But can anyone dare to complain about another's pride when he himself never has time for himself? Yet whoever you are, the great man has sometimes gazed upon you, even if his look was patronizing. He has bent his ears to your words. He has let you walk beside him. but you never deign to look at yourself or listen to yourself. So you have no reason to claim credit from anyone for those attentions, since you showed them not because you wanted someone else's company, but because you could not bear your own. Even if all the bright intellects who ever lived were to agree to ponder this one theme, they would never sufficiently express their surprise at this fog in the human mind. Men do not let anyone seize their estates, and if there is the slightest dispute about their boundaries, they rush to stones and arms. But they allow others to encroach on their lives. Why, they themselves even invite in those who will take over their lives. You will find no one willing to share out his money, but to how many does each of us divide up his life? People are frugal in guarding their personal property, but as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. So I would like to fasten on someone from the older generation and say to him, I see that you have come to the last stage of human life. You are close upon your 100th year, or even beyond. Come now, hold an audit of your life. Reckon how much of your time has been taken up by a moneylender, how much by a mistress, a patron, a client, quarreling with your wife, punishing your slaves, dashing about the city on your social obligations. Consider also the diseases which we have brought on ourselves, and the time, too, which has been unused. You will find that you have fewer years than you reckon. Call to mind when you ever had a fixed purpose, how few days have passed as you had planned, when you were ever at your own disposal, when your face wore its natural expression, when your mind was undisturbed. What work you have achieved in such a long life. How many have plundered your life when you were unaware of your losses? How much you have lost through groundless sorrow, foolish joy, greedy desire, the seductions of society. How little of your own was left to you. You will realize that you are dying prematurely. So what is the reason for this? You are living as if destined to live forever. Your own frailty never occurs to you. You don't notice how much time has already passed, but squander it as though you had a full and overflowing supply. Though all the while that very day which you are devoting to somebody or something may be your last. You act like mortals in all that you fear, and like immortals in all that you desire. You will hear many people saying, when I am 50, I shall retire into leisure. When I am 60, I shall give up public duties. And what guarantee do you have of a longer life? Who will allow your course to proceed as you arrange it? Aren't you ashamed to keep for yourself just the remnants of your life, and to devote to wisdom only that time which cannot be spent on any business? How late it is to begin really to live just when life must end. How stupid to forget our mortality and put off sensible plans to our 50th and 60th years, aiming to begin life from a point at which few have arrived. You will notice that the most powerful and highly stationed men let drop remarks in which they pray for leisure, praise it, and rate it higher than all their blessings. At times they long to descend from their pinnacles if they can in safety, for even if nothing external assails or agitates it, high fortune of itself comes crashing down. The deified Augustus, to whom the gods granted more than to anyone else, never ceased to pray for rest and to seek a respite from public affairs. Everything he said always reverted to this theme, his hope for leisure. He used to beguile his labors with this consolation, sweet though false, that one day he would live to please himself. In a letter he wrote to the Senate, after he promised that his rest would not be lacking in dignity nor inconsistent with his former glory, I find these words: but it is more impressive to carry out these things than to promise them. Nevertheless, since the delightful reality is still a long way off, my longing for that much-desired time has led me to anticipate some of its delight by the pleasure arising from words. So valuable did leisure seem to him that because he could not enjoy it in actuality, he did so mentally in advance. He who saw that everything depended on himself alone, who decided the fortune of individuals and nations, was happiest when thinking of that day on which he would lay aside his own greatness. He knew from experience how much sweat those blessings gleaming through every land cost him, how many secret anxieties they concealed. He was forced to fight first with his fellow countrymen, then with his colleagues, and finally with his relations, shedding blood on land and sea, driven to fight in Macedonia, Sicily, Egypt, Syria, Asia. Almost every country he turned his armies against foreign enemies when they were tired of shedding Roman blood. While he was establishing peace in the Alps and subduing enemies established in the middle of his peaceful empire, while he was extending his boundaries beyond the Rhine, the Euphrates, and the Danube, at Rome itself, Murena, Caepio, Lepidus, Ignatius, and others were sharpening their swords against him. Nor had he yet escaped their plots when his daughter and all the noble youths, bound to her by adultery, as though by an oath, kept alarming his feeble old age, as did Iulus, and a second formidable woman linked to an Antony. He cut away these ulcers, limbs and all, but others took their place, just like a body with a surfeit of blood, which is always subject to a hemorrhage somewhere. So he longed for leisure, and as his hopes and thoughts dwelt on that, he found relief for his labors. This was the prayer of the man who could grant the prayers of mankind. When Marcus Cicero was cast among men like Catiline and Clodius and Pompey and Crassus, some of them undisguised enemies and some doubtful friends, when he was tossed about in the storm that struck the state, he tried to hold it steady as it went to its doom. But at last he was swept away. He had neither peace in prosperity nor patience in adversity. And how often does he curse that very consulship, which he had praised without ceasing, though not without good reason. What woeful words he uses in a letter to Atticus when the elder Pompey had been conquered, and his son was still trying to revive his defeated forces in Spain. "Do you want to know," he said, "what I'm doing here? I'm staying a semi-prisoner in my Tusculan villa." He then goes on to bewail his former life, to complain of the present, and to despair of the future. Cicero called himself a semi-prisoner, but really and truly the wise man will never go so far as to use such an abject term. He will never be a semi-prisoner, but will always enjoy freedom which is solid and complete, at liberty to be his own master and higher than all others. For what can be above the man who is above fortune? Livius Drusus, a bold and vigorous man, had proposed laws which renewed the evil policy of the Gracchi, and he was supported by a huge crowd from all over Italy. But he could see no successful outcome for his measures, which he could neither carry through nor abandon once embarked upon. And he is said to have cursed the turbulent life he had always lived, saying that he alone had never had a holiday, even as a child. For while still a ward and dressed as a youth, he ventured to speak to a jury in favor of some accused men, and to acquire influence in the law courts, with so much effect that, as we all know, he forced certain verdicts favorable to his clients. To what lengths would so precocious an ambition not go? You might have known that such premature boldness would result in terrible trouble, both public and private. So he was too late in complaining that he had never had a holiday, since from his boyhood he had been a serious troublemaker in the Forum. It is uncertain whether he died by his own hand, for he collapsed after receiving a sudden wound in the groin, some people doubting whether his death was self-inflicted, but no one doubting that it was timely. It would be superfluous to mention any more who, though seeming to others the happiest of mortals, themselves bore true witness against themselves by their expressed hatred of every action of their lives. Yet they did not change themselves or anyone else by these complaints, for after their explosion of words, their feelings reverted to normal. Assuredly your lives, even if they last more than 1,000 years, will shrink into the tiniest span. Those vices will swallow up any space of time, the actual time you have, which reason can prolong, though it naturally passes quickly, inevitably escapes you rapidly. For you do not grasp it or hold it back or try to delay that swiftest of all things, but you let it slip away as though it was something superfluous and replaceable. But among the worst offenders, I count those who spend all their time in drinking and lust, for these are the worst preoccupations of all. Other people, even if they are possessed by an illusory semblance of glory, suffer from a respectable delusion. You can give me a list of miserly men or hot-tempered men who indulge in unjust hatreds or wars, but they are all sinning in a more manly way. It is those who are on a headlong course of gluttony and lust who are stained with dishonor. Examine how all these people spend their time, how long they devote to their accounts, to laying traps for others, or fearing those laid for themselves, to paying court to others or being courted themselves, to giving or receiving bail, to banquets, which now count as official business. You will see how their activities, good or bad, do not give them even time to breathe. Finally, it is generally agreed that no activity can be successfully pursued by an individual who is preoccupied, not rhetoric or liberal studies, since the mind, when distracted, absorbs nothing deeply, but rejects everything which is, so to speak, crammed into it. Living is the least important activity of the preoccupied man. Yet there is nothing which is harder to learn. There are many instructors in the other arts to be found everywhere. Indeed, some of these arts mere boys have grasped so thoroughly that they can even teach them. But learning how to live takes a whole life, and which may surprise you more, it takes a whole life to learn how to die. So many of the finest men have put aside all their encumbrances, renouncing riches and business and pleasure, and made it their one aim up to the end of their lives to know how to live. Yet most of these have died confessing that they did not yet know, still less can those others know. Believe me, it is the sign of a great man, and one who is above human error, not to allow his time to be frittered away. He has the longest possible life, simply because whatever time was available, he devoted entirely to himself. None of it lay fallow and neglected. None of it under another's control. For being an extremely thrifty guardian of his time, he never found anything for which it was worth exchanging. So he had enough time. But those into whose lives the public have made great inroads inevitably have too little. Nor must you think that such people do not sometimes recognize their loss. Indeed, you will hear many of those to whom great prosperity is a burden sometimes crying out amidst their hordes of clients, or their pleadings in law courts, or their other honorable miseries. It's impossible to live. Of course it's impossible. All those who call you to themselves draw you away from yourself. How many days has that defendant stolen from you? Or that candidate? Or that old lady worn out with burying her heirs? Or that man shamming an illness to excite the greed of legacy hunters? Or that influential friend who keeps people like you not for friendship, but for display? Mark off, I tell you, and review the days of your life. You will see that very few of the useless remnants have been left to you. One man who has achieved the badge of office he coveted longs to lay it aside, and keeps repeating, will this year never end? Another man thought it a great coup to win the chance of giving games, but having given them, he says, when shall I be rid of them? That advocate is grabbed on every side throughout the forum and fills the whole place with a huge crowd extending further than he can be heard. But he says, when will vacation come? Everyone hustles his life along and is troubled by a longing for the future and weariness of the present. But the man who spends all his time on his own needs, who organizes every day as though it were his last, neither longs for nor fears the next day. For what new pleasures can any hour now bring him? He has tried everything and enjoyed everything to repletion. For the rest, fortune can dispose as she likes. His life is now secure. Nothing can be taken from this life, and you can only add to it, as if giving to a man who is already full and satisfied food, which he does not want but can hold. So you must not think a man has lived long because he has white hair and wrinkles. He has not lived long, just existed long. For suppose you should think that a man had had a long voyage, who had been caught in a raging storm as he left harbor, and carried hither and thither, and driven round and round in a circle by the rage of opposing winds. He did not have a long voyage, just a long tossing about. I am always surprised to see some people demanding the time of others and meeting a most obliging response. Both sides have in view the reason for which the time is asked, and neither regards the time itself as if nothing there is being asked for and nothing given. They are trifling with life's most precious commodity, being deceived because it is an intangible thing, not open to inspection, and therefore reckoned very cheap, in fact, almost without any value. People are delighted to accept pensions and gratuities, for which they hire out their labor or their support or their services. But nobody works out the value of time. Men use it lavishly as if it cost nothing. But if death threatens these same people, you will see them praying to their doctors. If they are in fear of capital punishment, you will see them prepared to spend their all to stay alive. So inconsistent are they in their feelings. But if each of us could have the tally of his future years set before him, as we can of our past years, how alarmed would be those who saw only a few years ahead, and how carefully would they use them. And yet, it is easy to organize an amount, however small, which is assured. We have to be more careful in preserving what will cease at an unknown point. But you are not to think that these people do not know how precious time is. They commonly say to those they are particularly fond of that they are ready to give them some of their years. And they do give them without being aware of it. But the gift is such that they themselves lose without adding anything to the others. But what they actually do not know is whether they are losing. Thus, they can bear the loss of what they do not know has gone. No one will bring back the years. No one will restore you to yourself. Life will follow the path it began to take, and will neither reverse nor check its course. It will cause no commotion to remind you of its swiftness, but glide on quietly. It will not lengthen itself for a king's command or a people's favor. As it started out on its first day, so it will run on, nowhere pausing or turning aside. What will be the outcome? You have been preoccupied while life hastens on. Meanwhile, death will arrive, and you have no choice in making yourself available for that. Can anything be more idiotic than certain people who boast of their foresight? They keep themselves officiously preoccupied in order to improve their lives. They spend their lives in organizing their lives. They direct their purposes with an eye to a distant future. But putting things off is the biggest waste of life. It snatches away each day as it comes, and denies us the present by promising the future. The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today. You are arranging what lies in fortune's control and abandoning what lies in yours. What are you looking at? To what goal are you straining? The whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. Listen to the cry of our greatest poet, who, as though inspired with divine utterance, sings salutary verses. Life's finest day for wretched mortals here is always first to flee. Why do you linger, he means. Why are you idle? If you don't grasp it first, it flees. And even if you do grasp it, it will still flee. So you must match time's swiftness with your speed in using it. And you must drink quickly as though from a rapid stream that will not always flow. In chastising endless delay, too, the poet very elegantly speaks not of the finest age, but finest day. However greedy you are, why are you so unconcerned and so sluggish while time flies so fast, extending months and years in a long sequence ahead of you? The poet is telling you about the day and about this very day that is escaping. So can it be doubted that for wretched mortals, that is, the preoccupied, the finest day, is always the first to flee? Old age overtakes them while they are still mentally childish, and they face it unprepared and unarmed, for they have made no provision for it, stumbling upon it suddenly and unawares, and without realizing that it was approaching day by day. Just as travelers are beguiled by conversation or reading, or some profound meditation, and find they have arrived at their destination before they knew they were approaching it. So it is with this unceasing and extremely fast-moving journey of life, which, waking or sleeping, we make at the same pace. The preoccupied become aware of it only when it is over. If I wanted to divide my theme into different headings and offer proofs, I would find many arguments to prove that the preoccupied find life very short. But Fabianus, who was not one of today's academic philosophers, but the true old-fashioned sort, used to say that we must attack the passions by brute force and not by logic, that the enemy's line must be turned by a strong attack and not by pinpricks, for vices have to be crushed rather than picked at. Still, in order that the people concerned may be censured for their own individual faults, they must be taught, and not just given up or lost. Life is divided into 3 periods: past, present, and future. Of these, the present is short, the future is doubtful, the past is certain. For this last is the one over which fortune has lost her power, which cannot be brought back to anyone's control. But this is what preoccupied people lose, for they have no time to look back at their past. And even if they did, it is not pleasant to recall activities they are ashamed of. So they are unwilling to cast their minds back to times ill spent, which they dare not relive. If their vices in recollection become obvious, even those vices whose insidious approach was disguised by the charm of some momentary pleasure. No one willingly reverts to the past unless all his actions have passed his own censorship, which is never deceived. The man who must fear his own memory is the one who has been ambitious in his greed, arrogant in his contempt, uncontrolled in his victories, treacherous in his deceptions, rapacious in his plundering, and wasteful in his squandering. And yet, this is the period of our time which is sacred and dedicated, which has passed beyond all human risks, and is removed from fortune's sway, which cannot be harassed by want or fear or attacks of illness. It cannot be disturbed or snatched from us. It is an untroubled, everlasting possession. In the present, we have only one day at a time, each offering a minute at a time. But all the days of the past will come to your call. You can detain and inspect them at your will, something which the preoccupied have no time to do. It is the mind which is tranquil and free from care which can roam through all the stages of its life. The minds of the preoccupied, as if harnessed in a yoke, cannot turn round and look behind them. So their lives vanish into an abyss. And just as it is no use pouring any amount of liquid into a container without a bottom to catch and hold it, so it does not matter how much time we are given if there is nowhere for it to settle. It escapes through the cracks and holes of the mind. The present time is extremely short, so much so that some people are unaware of it, for it is always on the move, flowing on in a rush. It ceases before it has come, and does not suffer delay any more than the firmament or the stars, whose unceasing movement never pauses in the same place. And so the preoccupied are concerned only with the present, and it is so short that it cannot be grasped. And even this is stolen from them while they are involved in their many distractions. In a word, would you like to know how they do not live long? See how keen they are to live long. Feeble old men pray for a few more years. They pretend they are younger than they are. They comfort themselves by this deception and fool themselves as eagerly as if they fooled fate at the same time. But when at last some illness has reminded them of their mortality, how terrified do they die, as if they were not just passing out of life, but being dragged out of it. They exclaim that they were fools because they have not really lived, and that if only they can recover from this illness, they will live in leisure. Then they reflect how pointlessly they acquired things they never would enjoy, and how all their toil has been in vain. But for those whose life is far removed from all business, it must be amply long. None of it is frittered away. None of it scattered here and there. None of it committed to fortune. None of it lost through carelessness. None of it wasted on largesse. None of it superfluous. The whole of it, so to speak, is well invested. So, however short, it is fully sufficient. And therefore, whenever his last day comes, the wise man will not hesitate to meet death with a firm step. Perhaps you want to know whom I would call the preoccupied. You must not imagine I mean just those who are driven from the law court only by the arrival of the watchdogs, or those whom you see crushed either honorably in their own crowd of supporters, or contemptuously in someone else's, or those whose social duties bring them forth from their own homes to dash them against someone else's doors, or those whom the praetor's auction spear occupies in acquiring disreputable gain which will one day turn rank upon them. Some men are preoccupied even in their leisure, in their country house, on their couch, in the midst of solitude, even when quite alone. They are their own worst company. You could not call theirs a life of leisure, but an idle preoccupation. Do you call that man leisured who arranges with anxious precision his Corinthian bronzes, the cost of which is inflated by the mania of a few collectors, and spends most of the day on rusty bits of metal? Who sits at a wrestling ring? For shame on us, we suffer from vices which are not even Roman, keenly following the bouts between boys. Who classifies his herds of pack animals into pairs according to age and color? Who pays for the maintenance of the latest athletes? Again, do you call those men leisured who spend many hours at the barber's simply to cut whatever grew overnight, to have a serious debate about every separate hair, to tidy up disarranged locks, or to train thinning ones from the sides to lie over the forehead? How angry they get if the barber has been a bit careless, as if he were trimming a real man. How they flare up if any of their mane is wrongly cut off, if any of it is badly arranged, or if it doesn't all fall into the right ringlets. Which of them would not rather have his country ruffled than his hair? Which would not be more anxious about the elegance of his head than its safety? Which would not rather be trim than honorable? Do you call those men leisured who divide their time between the comb and the mirror? And what about those who busy themselves in composing, listening to, or learning songs while they distort their voice, whose best and simplest tone nature intended to be the straight one, into the most unnatural modulations, who are always drumming with their fingers as they beat time to an imagined tune, whom you can hear humming to themselves, even when they are summoned on a serious, often even sorrowful affair? Theirs is not leisure, but indolent occupation. And good heavens, as for their banquets, I would not reckon on them as leisure times when I see how anxiously they arrange their silver, how carefully they gird up the tunics of their page boys, how on tenterhooks they are to see how the cook has dealt with the boar, with what speed smooth-faced slaves rush around on their duties, with what skill birds are carved into appropriate portions, how carefully wretched little slaves wipe up the spittle of drunkards. By these means, they cultivate a reputation for elegance and good taste, and to such an extent do their failings follow them into all areas of their private lives that they cannot eat or drink without ostentation. I would also not count as leisured those who are carried around in a sedan chair and a litter, and turn up punctually for their drives as if it was forbidden to give them up, who have to be told when to bathe or to swim or to dine. They are so enervated by the excessive torpor of a self-indulgent mind that they cannot trust themselves to know if they are hungry. I'm told that one of these self-indulgent people, if self-indulgence is the right word for unlearning the ordinary habits of human life, when he had been carried out from the bath and put in his sedan chair, asked, "Am I now sitting down?" Do you think that this man, who doesn't know if he is sitting down, knows whether he is alive, whether he sees, whether he is at leisure? It is difficult to say whether I pity him more if he really did not know this, or if he pretended not to know. They really experience forgetfulness of many things, but they also pretend to forget many things. They take delight in certain vices as proofs of their good fortune. It seems to be the lowly and contemptible man who knows what he's doing. After that, see if you can accuse the mimes of inventing many details in order to attack luxury. In truth, they pass over more than they make up, and such a wealth of incredible vices have appeared in this generation, which shows talent in this one area, that we could now actually accuse the mimes of ignoring them. To think that there is anyone so lost in luxuries that he has to trust another to tell him if he's sitting down. So this one is not at leisure, and you must give him another description. He is ill, or even he is dead. The man who is really at leisure is also aware of it, but this one who is only half alive and needs to be told the positions of his own body, how can he have control over any of his time? It would be tedious to mention individually those who have spent all their lives playing draughts or ball or carefully cooking themselves in the sun. They are not at leisure whose pleasures involve a serious commitment. For example, nobody will dispute that those people are busy about nothing who spend their time on useless literary studies. Even among the Romans, there is now a large company of these. It used to be a Greek failing to want to know how many oarsmen Ulysses had, whether the Iliad or the Odyssey was written first, and whether, too, they were by the same author, and other questions of this kind, which, if you keep them to yourself, in no way enhance your private knowledge, and if you publish them, make you appear more a bore than a scholar. But now the Romans, too, have been afflicted by the pointless enthusiasm for useless knowledge. Recently, I heard somebody reporting which Roman general first did this or that. Duilius first won a naval battle. Curius Dentatus first included elephants in a triumph. So far, these facts, even if they do not contribute to real glory, at least are concerned with exemplary services to the state. Such knowledge will not do us any good, but it interests us because of the appeal of these pointless facts. We can also excuse those who investigate who first persuaded the Romans to embark on a ship. That was Claudius, who for this reason was called Cordex, because a structure linking several wooden planks was called in antiquity a cordex. Hence, too, the law tables are called codices. And even today, the boats which carry provisions up the Tiber are called by the old-fashioned name Codicaria, doubtless too. It is of some importance to know that Valerius Corvinus first conquered Messana, and was the first of the family of the Valeria to be surnamed Messana from the name of the captured city, the spelling of which was gradually corrupted in everyday speech to Messala. Perhaps we will also allow someone to take seriously the fact that Lucius Sulla first exhibited lions loose in the circus, though at other times they were shown in fetters, and that javelin throwers were sent by King Bocchus to kill them. This, too, may be excused, but does it serve any good purpose? To know that Pompey first exhibited in the circus a fight involving 18 elephants, pitting innocent men against them in a staged battle. A leader of the state, and, as we are told, a man of notable kindliness among the leaders of old, he thought it would be a memorable spectacle to kill human beings in a novel way. Are they to fight to the death? Not good enough. Are they to be torn to pieces? Not good enough. Let them be crushed by animals of enormous bulk. It would be better for such things to be forgotten, lest in the future someone in power might learn about them and not wish to be outdone in such a piece of inhumanity. Oh, what darkness does great prosperity cast over our minds. He thought himself beyond nature's laws at the time that he was throwing so many crowds of wretched men to wild creatures from abroad, when he was setting such disparate creatures against each other, when he was shedding so much blood in front of the Roman people, who themselves were soon to be forced by him to shed their own blood. But later he himself, betrayed by Alexandrian treachery, offered himself to be stabbed by the lowest slave, only then realizing that his surname, Great, was an empty boast. But to return to the point from which I digressed, and to illustrate how some people spend useless efforts on these same topics, the man I referred to reported that Metellus, in his triumph after conquering the Carthaginians in Sicily, alone among all the Romans, had 120 elephants led before his chariot, and that Sulla was the last of the Romans to have extended the Pomerium, which it was the ancient practice to extend after acquiring Italian, but never provincial, territory. Is it better to know this than to know that the Aventine Hill, as he asserted, is outside the Pomerium for one of two reasons, either because the plebs withdrew to it, or because when Remus took the auspices there, the birds had not been favorable. and countless further theories that are either false or very close to lies. For even if you admit that they say all this in good faith, even if they guarantee the truth of their statements, whose mistakes will thereby be lessened? Whose passions restrained? Who will be made more free, more just, more magnanimous? Our Fabianus used to say that sometimes he wondered whether it was better not to be involved in any researches than to get entangled in these. Of all people, only those are at leisure who make time for philosophy. Only those are really alive. For they not only keep a good watch over their own lifetimes, but they annex every age to theirs. All the years that have passed before them are added to their own. Unless we are very ungrateful, all those distinguished founders of holy creeds were born for us and prepared for us a way of life. By the toil of others, we are led into the presence of things which have been brought from darkness into light. We are excluded from no age, but we have access to them all. And if we are prepared in loftiness of mind to pass beyond the narrow confines of human weakness, there is a long period of time through which we can roam. We can argue with Socrates, express doubt with Carneades, cultivate retirement with Epicurus, overcome human nature with the Stoics, and exceed its limits with the Cynics. Since nature allows us to enter into a partnership with every age, why not turn from this brief and transient spell of time and give ourselves wholeheartedly to the past, which is limitless and eternal, and can be shared with better men than we, those who rush about on social duties, disturbing both themselves and others, when they have duly finished their crazy round, and have daily crossed everyone's threshold and passed by no open door, when they have carried around their self-interested greetings to houses that are miles apart. How few will they be able to see in a city so enormous and so distracted by varied desires? How many will there be who through sleepiness or self-indulgence or ungraciousness will exclude them? How many, after keeping them in an agony of waiting, will pretend to be in a hurry and rush past them? How many will avoid going out through a hall crowded with dependents and escape through a secret door, as if it were not even more discourteous to deceive callers than to exclude them? How many, half asleep and sluggish after yesterday's drinking, will yawn insolently and have to be prompted 1,000 times in a whisper before scarcely moving their lips? They can greet by name the poor wretches who have broken their own slumbers in order to wait on another's. You should rather suppose that those are involved in worthwhile duties who wish to have daily as their closest friends Zeno, Pythagoras, Democritus, and all the other high priests of liberal studies, and Aristotle and Theophrastus. None of these will be too busy to see you. None of these will not send his visitor away happier and more devoted to himself. None of these will allow anyone to depart empty-handed. They are at home to all mortals by night and by day. None of these will force you to die, but all will teach you how to die. None of them will exhaust your years, but each will contribute his years to yours. With none of these will conversation be dangerous, or his friendship fatal, or attendance on him expensive. From them you can take whatever you wish. It will not be their fault if you do not take your fill from them. What happiness, what a fine old age awaits the man who has made himself a client of these. He will have friends whose advice he can ask on the most important or the most trivial matters, whom he can consult daily about himself, who will tell him the truth without insulting him, and praise him without flattery, who will offer him a pattern on which to model himself. We are in the habit of saying that it was not in our power to choose the parents who were allotted to us, that they were given to us by chance. But we can choose whose children we would like to be. There are households of the noblest intellects. Choose the one into which you wish to be adopted, and you will inherit not only their names, but their property too. Nor will this property need to be guarded meanly or grudgingly. The more it is shared out, the greater it will become. These will offer you a path to immortality and raise you to a point from which no one is cast down. This is the only way to prolong mortality, even to convert it to immortality. Honors, monuments, Whatever the ambitious have ordered by decrees or raised in public buildings are soon destroyed. There is nothing that the passage of time does not demolish and remove, but it cannot damage the works which philosophy has consecrated. No age will wipe them out, no age diminish them. The next and every following age will only increase the veneration for them, since envy operates on what is at hand, but we can more openly admire things from a distance. So the life of the philosopher extends widely. He is not confined by the same boundary as are others. He alone is free from the laws that limit the human race, and all ages serve him as though he were a god. Some time has passed. He grasps it in his recollection. Time is present. He uses it. Time is to come. He anticipates it. This combination of all times into one gives him a long life. But life is very short and anxious for those who forget the past, neglect the present, and fear the future. When they come to the end of it, the poor wretches realize too late that for all this time they have been preoccupied in doing nothing. And the fact that they sometimes invoke death is no proof that their lives seem long. Their own folly afflicts them with restless emotions, which hurl themselves upon the very things they fear. They often long for death because they fear it. Nor is this a proof that they are living for a long time, that the day often seems long to them, or that they complain that the hours pass slowly until the time fixed for dinner arrives. For as soon as their preoccupations fail them, they are restless with nothing to do, not knowing how to dispose of their leisure or make the time pass. And so they are anxious for something else to do, and all the intervening time is wearisome. Really, it is just as when a gladiatorial show has been announced, or they are looking forward to the appointed time of some other exhibition or amusement they want to leap over the days in between. Any deferment of the longed-for event is tedious to them, yet the time of the actual enjoyment is short and swift, and made much shorter through their own fault, for they dash from one pleasure to another, and cannot stay steady in one desire. Their days are not long, but odious. On the other hand, how short do the nights seem which they spend drinking or sleeping with harlots. Hence the lunacy of the poets, who encourage human frailty by their stories, in which Jupiter, seduced by the pleasures of love-making, is seen to double the length of the night. What else is it but to inflame our vices when they quote the gods to endorse them? And as a precedent for our failings, they offer and excuse the wantonness of the gods. Can the nights, which they purchase so dearly, not seem much too short to these people? They lose the day in waiting for the night, and the night in fearing the dawn. Even their pleasures are uneasy and made anxious by various fears, and at the very height of their rejoicing, the worrying thought steals over them. How long will this last? This feeling has caused kings to bewail their power, and they were not so much delighted by the greatness of their fortune as terrified by the thought of its inevitable end. When that most arrogant king of Persia, Asterisk, was deploying his army over vast plains, and could not number it, but had to measure it, he wept, because in 100 years, out of that huge army, not a soul would be alive. But he who was weeping was the very man who would bring their fate upon them, and would destroy some on the sea, some on land, some in battle, some in flight, and in a very short time would wipe out all those for whose 100th year he was afraid. And what of the fact that even their joys are uneasy? The reason is that they are not based on firm causes, but they are agitated as groundlessly as they arise. But what kind of times can those be, do you think, which they themselves admit are wretched? Since even the joys by which they are exalted and raised above humanity are pretty corrupt. All the greatest blessings create anxiety, and fortune is never less to be trusted than when it is fairest. To preserve prosperity, we need other prosperity. And to support the prayers which have turned out well, we have to make other prayers. Whatever comes our way by chance is unsteady, and the higher it rises, the more liable it is to fall. Furthermore, what is doomed to fall delights no one. So it is inevitable that life will be not just very short, but very miserable for those who acquire by great toil what they must keep by greater toil. They achieve what they want laboriously. They possess what they have achieved anxiously. And meanwhile, they take no account of time that will never more return. New preoccupations take the place of the old. Hope excites more hope, and ambition more ambition. They do not look for an end to their misery, but simply change the reason for it. We have found our own public honors a torment, and we spend more time on someone else's. We have stopped laboring as candidates, and we start canvassing for others. We have given up the troubles of a prosecutor and taken on those of a judge. A man stops being a judge and becomes president of a court. He has grown old in the job of managing the property of others for a salary, and then spends all his time looking after his own. Marius was released from army life to become busy in the consulship. Quintius hastens to get through his dictatorship, but he will be summoned back to it from the plow. Scipio will go against the Carthaginians before he is experienced enough for such an undertaking. Victorious over Hannibal, victorious over Antiochus, distinguished in his own consulship and a surety for his brothers, if he had not himself forbidden it, he would have been set up beside Jupiter. But discord in the state will harass its savior, and after, as a young man, he has scorned honors fit for the gods, at length, when old, he will take delight in an ostentatiously stubborn exile. There will always be causes for anxiety, whether due to prosperity or to wretchedness. Life will be driven on through a succession of preoccupations. We shall always long for leisure, but never enjoy it. And so, my dear Paulinus, extract yourself from the crowd, and as you have been storm-tossed more than your age deserves, you must at last retire into a peaceful harbor. Consider how many waves you have encountered, how many storms, some of which you have sustained in private life, and some you have brought upon yourself in public life. Your virtue has for long enough been shown when you were a model of active industry. Try how it will manage in leisure. The greater part of your life, certainly the better part, has been devoted to the state. Take some of your own time for yourself, too. I am not inviting you to idle or purposeless sloth, or to drown all your natural energy in sleep and the pleasures that are dear to the masses. That is not to have repose. When you are retired and enjoying peace of mind, you will find to keep you busy more important activities than all those you have performed so energetically up to now. Indeed, you are managing the accounts of the world as scrupulously as you would another person's, as carefully as your own, as conscientiously as the state's. You are winning affection in a job in which it is hard to avoid ill will. But believe me, it is better to understand the balance sheet of one's own life than of the corn trade. You must recall that vigorous mind of yours, supremely capable of dealing with the greatest responsibilities, from a task which is certainly honorable, but scarcely suited to the happy life. And you must consider that all your youthful training in the liberal studies was not directed to this end, that many thousands of measures of corn might safely be entrusted to you. You had promised higher and greater things of yourself. There will not be wanting men who are completely worthy and hard-working. Stolid pack animals are much more fit for carrying loads than thoroughbred horses. Whoever subdued their noble speed with a heavy burden? Consider, too, how much anxiety you have in submitting yourselves to such a weight of responsibility. You are dealing with the human belly. A hungry people neither listens to reason, nor is mollified by fair treatment, or swayed by any appeals. Quite recently, within a few days after Gaius Caesar died, still feeling very upset, if the dead have feelings, because he saw that the Roman people were still surviving, with a supply of food for 7 or at most 8 days. While he was building bridges with boats and playing with the resources of the empire, we faced the worst of all afflictions. Even to those under siege, a shortage of provisions. His imitation of a mad foreign king, doomed in his pride, nearly cost the city destruction and famine and the universal collapse that follows famine. What then must those have felt who had charge of the corn supply when they were threatened with stones, weapons, fire, and Gaius? With a huge pretense, they managed to conceal the great evil lurking in the vitals of the state. And assuredly they had good reason. For certain ailments must be treated while the patient is unaware of them. Knowing about their disease has caused the death of many. You must retire to these pursuits, which are quieter, safer, and more important. Do you think it is the same thing whether you are overseeing the transfer of corn into granaries, unspoilt by the dishonesty and carelessness of the shippers, and taking care that it does not get damp and then ruined through heat, and that it tallies in measure and weight? Or whether you take up these sacred and lofty studies from which you will learn the substance of God and His will, His mode of life, His shape? What fate awaits your soul? Where nature lays us to rest when released from our bodies? What is the force which supports all the heaviest elements of this world at the center, suspends the light elements above, carries fire to the highest part, and sets the stars in motion with their proper changes? And learn other things in succession, which are full of tremendous marvels. You really should leave the ground and turn your thoughts to these studies. Now, while the blood is hot, you should make your way with vigor to better things. In this kind of life, you will find much that is worth your study: the love and practice of the virtues, forgetfulness of the passions, the knowledge of how to live and die, and a life of deep tranquility. Indeed, the state of all who are preoccupied is wretched, but the most wretched are those who are toiling not even at their own preoccupations, but must regulate their sleep by another's, and their walk by another's pace, and obey orders in those freest of all things, loving and hating. If such people want to know how short their lives are, let them reflect how small a portion is their own. So when you see a man repeatedly wearing the robe of office, or one whose name is often spoken in the forum, do not envy him. These things are won at the cost of life. In order that 1 year may be dated from their names, they will waste all their own years. Life has left some men struggling at the start of their careers before they could force their way to the height of their ambition. Some men, after they have crawled through 1,000 indignities to the supreme dignity, have been assailed by the gloomy thought that all their labors were but for the sake of an epitaph. Sartre tried to adjust their extreme old age to new hopes, as though it were youth, but find its weakness fails them in the midst of efforts that overtax it. It is a shameful sight when an elderly man runs out of breath while he is pleading in court for litigants who are total strangers to him, and trying to win the applause of the ignorant bystanders. It is disgraceful to see a man collapsing in the middle of his duties, worn out more by his lifestyle than by his labors. Disgraceful, too, is it when a man dies in the midst of going through his accounts, and his heir, long kept waiting, smiles in relief. I cannot resist telling you of an instance that occurs to me. Sextus Turanius was an old man known to be scrupulous and diligent, who, when he was 90, at his own request, was given retirement from his office by Gaius Caesar. He then ordered himself to be laid out on his bed, and lamented by the assembled household, as though he were dead. The house bewailed its old master's leisure, and did not cease its mourning until his former job was restored to him. Is it really so pleasant to die in harness? That is the feeling of many people. Their desire for their work outlasts their ability to do it. They fight against their own bodily weakness, and they regard old age as a hardship on no other grounds than that it puts them on the shelf. The law does not make a man a soldier after 50 or a senator after 60. Men find it more difficult to gain leisure from themselves than from the law. Meanwhile, as they rob and are robbed, as they disturb each other's peace, as they make each other miserable, their lives pass without satisfaction, without pleasure, without mental improvement. No one keeps death in view. No one refrains from hopes that look far ahead. Indeed, some people even arrange things that are beyond life, massive tombs, dedications of public buildings, shows for their funerals, and ostentatious burials. But in truth, such people's funerals should be conducted with torches and wax tapers, as though they had lived the shortest of lives.